Hello everyone, welcome back. Today, we're going to talk about a very famous woman from history. Her name is Cleopatra. Have you ever wondered what it really takes to be remembered for thousands of years? Some people leave behind books, some leave inventions, but a few leave behind stories so powerful that the world never forgets them. Cleopatra is one of those people. Her story is filled with mystery, power, and choices that changed history. And the interesting part, people are still debating who she really was till date. Let's go back more than 2,000 years to the land of the Nile. The year was 69 BCE, and a baby girl was born in the city of Alexandria. Her name was Cleopatra. At that time, nobody could have guessed that this little girl would become one of the most famous women in history. Cleopatra was not born into an ordinary family. She belonged to the Ptolemaic dynasty, a family of rulers who had controlled Egypt for almost 300 years. Now, here's something interesting. The Ptolemies were not originally Egyptian. They came from Greece. After Alexander the Great conquered Egypt, one of his generals, Ptolemy, took control. From then on, his descendants ruled Egypt. This is why Cleopatra's family spoke Greek, lived by Greek customs, and often married within their own family to keep the royal bloodline strong. Still, even though her family was Greek by origin, they ruled as pharaohs of Egypt. That meant they wore the crowns, they appeared in temples, and they carried the titles of the old Egyptian kings. Cleopatra, as a child, would have seen the statues of gods, the pyramids, and the great temples that reminded everyone of Egypt's long, powerful history. But Egypt at the time of Cleopatra's birth was not without problems. On the surface, Egypt looked rich and strong. The Nile River made the land fertile, providing grain that fed many people, even outside of Egypt. Alexandria, the capital city, was a center of learning and trade. Its famous library and lighthouse made it one of the wonders of the ancient world. Yet, beneath this greatness, Egypt was struggling. There were political fights inside the royal family. Brothers and sisters often fought each other for power. The people were sometimes unhappy with the rulers because the Ptolemies were seen as outsiders. And outside Egypt's borders, a new danger was growing: Rome. The Roman Republic was becoming the most powerful empire around the Mediterranean. They had strong armies, clever generals, and more influence over their neighbors. So, Cleopatra was born into a world of both opportunity and danger. On one hand, she had the privilege of being a princess. She lived in a palace surrounded by teachers, servants, and the beauty of Alexandria. On the other hand, she grew up knowing that her family's power was not completely secure. Egypt's wealth made it desirable to outsiders, and Rome had its eyes on it. What made Cleopatra different, even from a young age, was her intelligence. While many members of her family chose to stay separate from Egyptian culture, Cleopatra wanted to connect with her people. Most Ptolemies never learned the Egyptian language. They preferred to speak Greek, but Cleopatra, historians tell us, studied Egyptian and spoke it fluently. This may sound simple, but it was a bold choice. It showed that she wanted to be more than a foreign queen ruling Egypt. She wanted to be seen as truly Egyptian. Imagine young Cleopatra walking through the palace gardens, listening to her tutors talk about philosophy, politics, and history. She was being prepared for a life in leadership, though perhaps no one knew yet that she would one day sit on the throne. Her childhood was a mix of luxury and responsibility, a time to learn and to watch the world around her. Egypt's story at this moment was like a great drama, a land full of beauty and knowledge, but also filled with tension and threats. Into this stage stepped Cleopatra, a girl who would grow into a queen remembered not just for her crown, but for her intelligence, her charm, and her ability to survive in a world where many powerful people fell. This was only the beginning of her journey. Let's do a quick lesson for part 1 of Cleopatra's story. Vocabulary teaching. Dynasty. A family of rulers who ruled for many years. Example: Cleopatra was part of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Repeat after me. Dynasty. Palace. A very big, beautiful home for a king or queen. Example: Cleopatra grew up in a palace. Repeat after me. Palace. Customs. The traditions or usual ways of a people. Example: her family followed Greek customs. Repeat after me. Customs. Pharaoh. The title for kings and queens of ancient Egypt. Example: the people called Cleopatra Pharaoh. Repeat after me. Pharaoh. Scrolls. Long pieces of paper rolled up, used for writing in the past. Example: the Library of Alexandria had many scrolls. Repeat after me. Scrolls. Republic. A government where people choose leaders, not a king. Example: Rome was a republic before it became an empire. Repeat after me. Republic. Speaking practice section. Repeat after me. Cleopatra was born in Alexandria. She was part of the Ptolemaic dynasty. She grew up in a palace. Egypt was powerful, but also had problems. Rome was a growing republic. Good. Now that you've learned some new things, let's move on to chapter 2 of Cleopatra's story. Imagine being 18 years old and suddenly becoming queen of one of the most famous kingdoms in the world. That's exactly what happened to Cleopatra. When her father, King Ptolemy XII, died, Cleopatra stepped into a role that would shape her entire life. But here's the twist. She wasn't queen alone. According to her family's traditions, Cleopatra had to share the throne with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. He was just a boy, about 10 years old, and to make it official, they were even married. It sounds strange to us today, but in the Ptolemaic dynasty, that was how power was kept inside the family. Now, think about it for a second. Cleopatra was a teenager, but she was smart, confident, and ready to lead. Her brother was a child, too young to really understand politics or ruling a country. It didn't take long for Cleopatra's independence to shine through. She wasn't the type to sit quietly in the background. She wanted to make decisions, guide her kingdom, and stand on her own feet, and she had the skills to do it. One of the most remarkable things about Cleopatra was her gift for languages. Most of her family spoke only Greek, even though they ruled Egypt. But Cleopatra was different. She learned Egyptian, the language of her people. Not only that, ancient writers say she spoke as many as 9 languages. 9. That meant she could speak directly with traders, soldiers, diplomats, and foreign rulers without needing a translator. Can you imagine the advantage she had? In a time when most leaders couldn't even talk to their own subjects, Cleopatra could walk into a room full of strangers and speak to almost anyone in their own tongue. That made her stand out, and it made people respect her. But being queen wasn't simple. Egypt was wealthy and important, but it was also unstable. Inside the royal palace, there were power struggles. Advisors and officials wanted to control the young king, her brother, and push Cleopatra out. Outside Egypt, Rome was becoming stronger and stronger. Rome had powerful generals and armies, and it was beginning to look at Egypt not just as a neighbor, but as a prize worth taking. So here was Cleopatra, 18 years old, facing challenges from her own family on one side and pressure from a rising empire on the other. It could have crushed her, but instead, she showed the world that she wasn't just a young girl with a crown. She was clever, determined, and ready to fight for her place. What made Cleopatra truly special wasn't only her beauty, as so many stories like to say, but her mind. She understood politics. She knew how to present herself. She could charm people with her words and win their support. She used intelligence as her greatest weapon, and it worked. Now, let's do some speaking practice. Vocabulary teaching. Ambitious, wanting to achieve a lot and be successful. Example, Cleopatra was ambitious and wanted to lead Egypt. Repeat, ambitious. Diplomat, a person who represents their country and talks to other countries. Example, Cleopatra spoke directly to diplomats from Rome. Repeat, diplomat. Advantage, something that helps you succeed. Example, speaking many languages gave Cleopatra an advantage. Repeat, advantage. Influence, the power to affect people or events. Example, Rome had influence over Egypt. Repeat, influence. Charm, the ability to attract or impress people. Example, Cleopatra used her charm to win people over. Repeat, charm. Strategy, a careful plan to achieve a goal. Example, Cleopatra studied politics and strategy to protect her throne. Repeat, strategy. Rival, someone competing with you for power or success. Example, Cleopatra had rivals in her own family. Repeat, rival. Practice section. Repeat after me. Cleopatra became queen at 18. She ruled with her younger brother. She spoke many languages. Cleopatra used her charm and intelligence. She faced rivals and political danger. Cleopatra's life as queen was far from easy. She was young, brilliant, and ambitious, but that also made her a target. Inside the palace, advisors and officials were constantly scheming. Her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, was still a child. So many of these men tried to control him and, by extension, control Egypt. Cleopatra was not someone they could ignore, and that made her enemies. Soon, the palace became a dangerous place. Arguments turned into plots, and plots almost turned into open conflict. Cleopatra's enemies managed to gain the upper hand, and before long, she was forced out of Alexandria, exiled. Imagine having to leave the throne you had fought for and the city you had called home. Most people would have given up, but not Cleopatra. Being sent into exile didn't break her spirit. In fact, it seemed to make her stronger. She refused to accept defeat. Cleopatra knew she had the intelligence, courage, and support to reclaim her throne. Instead of sulking or hiding, she began to plan her return. Every decision she made, every ally she reached out to, was calculated. She understood that reclaiming power wasn't just about strength, it was about timing, strategy, and influence. Even in exile, Cleopatra maintained her presence. She spoke to supporters, reminded them of her vision for Egypt, and made sure her enemies knew she was not gone for good. She studied her rivals and observed the politics of the region. Rome, the rising empire, had eyes on Egypt, and Cleopatra understood that winning Roman support could be crucial. Her plan for a comeback wasn't reckless. She waited for the right moment and thought through every step. Cleopatra wasn't just thinking about returning quietly. She wanted a dramatic and unforgettable return that would remind everyone why she was queen. This part of her story shows her resilience. Exile could have ended her reign, but she turned it into an opportunity to grow stronger. She used her intelligence, charm, and ability to inspire loyalty to prepare for the moment she would step back onto the throne. When Cleopatra finally returned to Alexandria, it wasn't just a simple return. It was a statement. She was still young, but she had grown into a leader who knew how to survive challenges, navigate political chaos, and outsmart rivals. Her enemies probably thought they had defeated her, but Cleopatra proved that determination and strategy could overcome even the toughest obstacles. Exile taught her something crucial. Leadership isn't just about power. It's about knowing when to wait, when to act, and how to use your mind as your most important tool. Cleopatra had survived the impossible and was ready to take control of Egypt again. By the end of this chapter in her life, Cleopatra had already shown the world she was not an ordinary queen. She was clever, bold, and resilient, a ruler who refused to let anyone take her place. And her story was only getting started. Now, let's do some learning. Vocabulary teaching. Exile. Being forced to leave your home or country. Example, Cleopatra was sent into exile after losing power. Repeat, exile. Resilience. The ability to recover after difficulties. Example, her resilience helped her survive exile. Repeat, resilience. Ally. A friend or supporter who helps you. Example, Cleopatra reached out to her allies to regain power. Repeat, ally. Rival. Someone competing against you. Example, Cleopatra had rivals inside her own palace. Repeat, rival. Strategy. A careful plan to achieve a goal. Example, Cleopatra planned her strategy before returning to Egypt. Repeat, strategy. Influence. The power to affect people or events. Example, Rome had influence over Egypt's politics. Repeat, influence. Ambitious. Wanting to achieve a lot and succeed. Example, Cleopatra was ambitious and determined to reclaim her throne. Repeat, ambitious. Speaking practice section. Repeat after me. Cleopatra was exiled from Alexandria. She refused to give up. She gathered allies to help her. She planned her strategy carefully. Rome had influence over Egypt. Now let's move on to part 4 of the story. Cleopatra's exile could have been the end of her story, but instead, it became the turning point. She was clever enough to know that to return to power, she needed more than just courage. She needed the right ally. And that's where Rome entered the picture. At this time, Rome wasn't just another country. It was the superpower of the Mediterranean world. Whoever controlled Egypt would control its richest grain, gold, and trade routes. Rome wanted Egypt, and Egypt needed Rome's support to survive. Cleopatra understood this perfectly. She knew that if she could win Rome to her side, her throne would be safe. Now, let's talk about Julius Caesar. He wasn't just any Roman. He was one of the most powerful leaders of his time. When Caesar came to Egypt, Cleopatra saw her chance. But how could she reach him? Her enemies, including her own brother's supporters, controlled the palace. Walking in openly wasn't an option. So Cleopatra decided on something bold, something unforgettable. The story goes that she had herself secretly delivered to Caesar, rolled up inside a carpet or wrapped in a sack of bedding, depending on the version you believe. Can you imagine the scene? Caesar unrolling the carpet, and out steps Cleopatra, young, intelligent, and full of charm. It wasn't just dramatic, it was genius. In one moment, she showed courage, creativity, and a sense of theater. Caesar was impressed, not just by her beauty, but by her intelligence and confidence. Cleopatra knew how to speak, how to argue, and how to win someone to her side. She made her case directly. She was the rightful ruler of Egypt. She had been unfairly exiled, and with his support, she could restore peace and stability to her kingdom. And it worked. Caesar agreed to support her. With his help, Cleopatra regained her throne. Her brother's forces were defeated, and Cleopatra once again became queen of Egypt. This time, though, she wasn't just a young ruler fighting to survive. She was now seen as a queen backed by Rome itself. Her return to power was more than just a political win. It showed the world what kind of leader she was. She could take risks, she could think outside the box, and she knew how to use both her intelligence and her presence to influence powerful men. Cleopatra had proven that she was not someone to underestimate, but her relationship with Caesar was more than just political. The two became close allies and lovers. Their partnership gave Cleopatra a stronger position in Egypt and in the wider Mediterranean world. Together, they represented a union of Egyptian wealth and Roman power. For Cleopatra, this was a huge victory. She was not just restored to her throne, she was now connected to the heart of Rome's power. Her dramatic return marked a new chapter in her reign. Cleopatra had shown resilience in exile, and now she showed brilliance in her comeback. She wasn't only surviving, she was thriving, and she was beginning to shape her destiny in ways that would echo through history. Now, let's do some learning. Vocabulary teaching. Ally, a friend or partner who helps you. Example, Caesar became Cleopatra's ally. Repeat, ally. Superpower, a country with great strength and influence. Example, Rome was the superpower of the Mediterranean. Repeat, superpower. Throne, the seat or power of a king or queen. Example, Cleopatra wanted to return to her throne. Repeat, throne. Genius, a very smart or creative idea or person. Example, her dramatic entrance to Caesar was pure genius. Repeat, genius. Risk, something dangerous that might fail. Example, Cleopatra took a risk by sneaking into the palace. Repeat, risk. Presence, the way someone's character or personality affects others. Example, Cleopatra's presence impressed Caesar. Repeat, presence. Victory, a win after a struggle. Example, her return to power was a great victory. Repeat, victory. Speaking practice section. Repeat after me. Cleopatra wanted to return to her throne. She needed an ally. Rome was a superpower. Cleopatra met Julius Caesar. Her dramatic return was a victory. Now on to part 5. Cleopatra and Caesar were not just political allies. They became partners in many ways. For Cleopatra, this relationship was more than romance. It was strategy. By connecting herself to one of the most powerful men in the world, she gave Egypt a shield against enemies at home and abroad. And for Caesar, Egypt was more than a beautiful land. It was a source of wealth, grain, and influence in the Mediterranean. Together, they made a powerful team. Their partnership quickly grew strong. Cleopatra gave birth to a son, named Caesarion, which means Little Caesar. This child symbolized the bond between Egypt and Rome. Cleopatra hoped that her son would one day rule and continue this union of two great powers. But their story wasn't just about love and children. It was also about politics. With Caesar's support, Cleopatra secured her throne fully and ended threats from her rivals. She showed Egypt that she wasn't just surviving because of luck, she was actively shaping her future. She used her intelligence, her presence, and her ability to build connections to keep Egypt strong. When Caesar invited Cleopatra to Rome, it was a moment of triumph for her. Imagine the scene, the Queen of Egypt walking through the streets of Rome, admired and whispered about by the people. Some were fascinated by her beauty and charm, while others saw her as a dangerous foreign queen trying to influence their leader. Cleopatra didn't mind. She was there to show Rome that Egypt was not weak. She wanted the world to see that she and Caesar were equals in power and ambition. Not everyone in Rome was happy about this. Some politicians feared Cleopatra's influence over Caesar. They thought she was too ambitious, too bold, and too clever. But Cleopatra didn't shrink away from this criticism. She continued to play her role with confidence, knowing that her partnership with Caesar gave her kingdom security. Her time in Rome also showed just how much she understood the importance of image. She didn't act like a guest or a visitor, she acted like a queen. Her presence in Rome was a statement. Egypt was strong, and Cleopatra was its proud leader. But as powerful as this partnership was, it was also fragile. Rome was full of enemies and rivals, and Caesar himself was surrounded by danger. For now, though, Cleopatra enjoyed the height of her influence. She had secured her throne, strengthened her kingdom, and created a powerful bond with Rome. Now, let's do some learning. Vocabulary teaching. Alliance, a partnership between people or countries. Example, Cleopatra formed an alliance with Caesar. Repeat. Alliance. Symbolize, to represent or stand for something. Example, Caesarion symbolized the bond between Egypt and Rome. Repeat. Symbolize. Triumph, a great success or victory. Example, visiting Rome was a triumph for Cleopatra. Repeat. Triumph. Criticism, negative comments or disapproval. Example, some Romans gave Cleopatra criticism for her influence. Repeat. Criticism. Fragile, easily broken or not secure. Example, Cleopatra's partnership with Caesar was powerful, but fragile. Repeat. Fragile. Ambition, a strong desire to achieve something. Example, Cleopatra showed great ambition as queen. Repeat. Ambition. Security, safety or protection from danger. Example, her alliance with Caesar gave Egypt security. Repeat. Security. Speaking practice section. Repeat after me. Cleopatra formed an alliance with Caesar. She gave birth to Caesarion. Her visit to Rome was a triumph. Some Romans gave her criticism. The alliance gave Egypt security. Now, let's move on to part 6 of Cleopatra's story. Cleopatra's partnership with Julius Caesar gave her power, security, and influence. But every great story has a sudden twist, and hers came in Rome. In 44 BCE, Caesar was at the height of his power. He had become dictator of Rome, and many believed he would soon make himself king. But not everyone was happy with that idea. A group of senators, afraid that Caesar was becoming too powerful, began to plot against him. Cleopatra, still in Rome with her young son Caesarion, was watching events closely. She knew how dangerous Roman politics could be. And then, disaster struck. On the famous Ides of March, Caesar walked into the Senate. There, the conspirators attacked him. He was stabbed again and again until he fell to the ground. Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in Rome, was dead. For Cleopatra, this was a shocking and dangerous moment. Everything she had built with Caesar, her security in Egypt, her position in Rome, her son's future, suddenly seemed fragile. She was now a queen in a foreign city, with enemies whispering against her and no protector to defend her. Cleopatra knew she couldn't stay in Rome any longer. She returned to Egypt, taking her son with her. Back in Alexandria, Cleopatra faced a new reality. Without Caesar, her throne was more vulnerable than ever. Rivals at home were waiting for their chance, and Rome itself was falling into chaos. The murder of Caesar had left Rome divided, with different leaders fighting for control. The names stood out: Mark Antony and Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir. Both men wanted power, and both would soon play a role in Cleopatra's story. But before she could deal with them, Cleopatra had to make sure Egypt stayed strong. She presented herself not just as a survivor, but as a true pharaoh of Egypt. She leaned on her intelligence, her resilience, and her ability to inspire loyalty among her people. She reminded Egypt that even though Caesar was gone, she was still their queen, and she would fight to keep her country safe and independent. This time in Cleopatra's life showed how adaptable she was. She had lost her most powerful ally, but she did not collapse. Instead, she waited, she watched, and she prepared. She knew that Rome's new leaders would soon come knocking, and when they did, she intended to meet them not as a victim, but as a queen ready to negotiate on her own terms. The death of Caesar could have ended Cleopatra's story, but it didn't. It simply moved her into the next chapter, a chapter filled with new alliances, new risks, and even greater challenges. Cleopatra was about to step into another partnership, one that would make her famous for centuries to come. But for now, she focused on survival, on protecting her son, and on keeping Egypt steady in a world that had been thrown into chaos. Now, let's learn some new things. Vocabulary teaching. Conspirator, a person who secretly plans to do something bad. Example, the conspirators killed Caesar. Repeat, conspirator. Ides of March, the date of March 15th, when Caesar was killed. Example, Caesar was murdered on the Ides of March. Repeat, Ides of March. Vulnerable, weak or easy to attack. Example, without Caesar, Cleopatra's throne was vulnerable. Repeat, vulnerable. Heir, a person who has the right to take over after someone dies. Example, Octavian was Caesar's adopted heir. Repeat, heir. Adaptable, able to change and adjust to new situations. Example, Cleopatra was adaptable after Caesar's death. Repeat, adaptable. Resilience, the strength to recover after difficulties. Example, her resilience helped her return to Egypt and lead. Repeat, resilience. Chaos, complete disorder or confusion. Example, Rome fell into chaos after Caesar's death. Repeat, chaos. Speaking practice section. Repeat after me. Caesar was killed on the Ides of March. Cleopatra lost her greatest ally. She returned to Egypt with Caesarion. Rome was in chaos. Cleopatra showed resilience and adaptability. Part 7. Antony and Cleopatra's Alliance. By the time Julius Caesar was gone, Cleopatra's world had changed again. She had secured her throne, but Rome was still the storm on Egypt's horizon. Power in Rome didn't rest with one man anymore. It was split among leaders who didn't trust each other, and one of those men was Mark Antony. Mark Antony was bold, charismatic, and a skilled general. He wasn't as calculating as Octavian, but he knew how to win loyalty. Cleopatra saw something in Antony, a partner who could help her protect Egypt. And Antony, well, he saw Cleopatra as more than just a queen. He saw her brilliance, her charm, and the wealth of Egypt behind her. When they first met, Cleopatra made sure it wasn't just another meeting. She knew the power of presentation. She arrived on a grand ship with purple sails, dressed like a goddess, surrounded by music and incense. Imagine Antony standing on the shore, watching this scene. It was impossible to ignore. Cleopatra wasn't just asking for an alliance. She was showing Antony that together they could be unstoppable. Their partnership quickly grew into more than politics. They fell in love, and their love story became one of the most famous in history. But it wasn't all romance, it was strategy, too. Cleopatra and Antony united their resources, her wealth and ships, his armies and influence in Rome. Together, they were stronger than either of them could be alone. Of course, alliances like this didn't go unnoticed. In Rome, Octavian was already uneasy. He spread stories that Antony was abandoning his Roman duties and living under Cleopatra's spell. Too many Romans, Antony looked less like a general and more like a man giving away power to a foreign queen. And Cleopatra, she was painted as the ambitious outsider who dared to challenge Rome's authority. But from Cleopatra's perspective, this was survival. Egypt wasn't just another province. It was her kingdom, her people, her legacy. Aligning with Antony wasn't only about love. It was about ensuring that Egypt remained independent in a world where Rome swallowed countries whole. They even had children together, further strengthening their bond. Cleopatra hoped this would tie Egypt and Rome's future together through family, not just politics. It was a clever move. Bloodlines often spoke louder than treaties. Still, you can probably feel the tension building. Cleopatra and Antony had power, love, and vision, but Rome had Octavian, and Octavian wasn't someone who let rivals grow too strong. This was the stage being set for one of history's most dramatic showdowns. Now, it's time to practice. Vocabulary: charismatic, a person who attracts others with charm. Example: Mark Antony was charismatic. Repeat: charismatic. Alliance: a partnership between people or countries. Example: Cleopatra formed an alliance with Antony. Repeat: alliance. Presentation: the way someone shows themselves to others. Example: Cleopatra's presentation impressed Antony. Repeat: presentation. Ambitious: wanting power or success. Example: Romans thought Cleopatra was ambitious. Repeat: ambitious. Legacy: what someone leaves behind after they are gone. Example: Cleopatra wanted to protect her legacy. Repeat: legacy. Showdown: a final, big fight or conflict. Example: a showdown was coming between Octavian and Antony. Repeat: showdown. Practice section. Repeat after me. Mark Antony was charismatic. Cleopatra formed an alliance with Antony. Cleopatra impressed Antony with her presentation. Many Romans thought Cleopatra was ambitious. Cleopatra wanted to protect her legacy. A showdown was coming. Part 8. The Battle of Actium and Cleopatra's Fate. Cleopatra and Mark Antony's alliance was powerful, but it came with enemies. The greatest one of all was Octavian, the future emperor of Rome. To him, Cleopatra and Antony weren't just rivals. They were a threat to Rome itself. Octavian was smart. He knew that battles weren't only fought with swords. They were also fought with words. In Rome, he spread rumors. He told the people that Antony had abandoned his Roman values. Look, Octavian said, he's no longer one of us. He lives with Cleopatra in Egypt. He calls her his queen. He gives her Roman lands. And Cleopatra, Octavian painted her as a cunning foreigner who wanted to control Rome through Antony. The Romans believed him. Soon, it wasn't just politics anymore. It was war. In 31 BCE, the two sides met at a place called Actium in Greece. This was not a small fight. Imagine the scene. Hundreds of warships line the sea, soldiers ready, flags flying in the wind. Cleopatra and Antony commanded one side. Octavian's fleet, led by his trusted general Agrippa, commanded the other. The future of both Rome and Egypt hung in the balance. The battle was fierce. Ships rammed into each other. Arrows filled the sky. The sound of waves, fire, and shouting men made it feel like the sea itself was at war. Antony fought bravely, but Octavian's forces were more organized. Slowly, Antony's side began to lose ground. Then came the moment that changed everything. Cleopatra, seeing the battle turn, made a choice. With her ships, she broke away and sailed back toward Egypt. Some say she believed the fight was lost. Others think she hoped Antony would follow her and regroup later. Whatever the reason, it caused chaos. When Antony saw Cleopatra's ships leaving, he couldn't bear to let her go alone. He abandoned the fight and followed her. His soldiers, left behind, were confused and defeated. Octavian's navy claimed victory. This was more than just a lost battle. It was the end of Antony and Cleopatra's dream. Octavian had won the war of power, and now he would come for Egypt. Back in Alexandria, Cleopatra tried to hold on. She fortified her city, gathered her treasures, and hoped for one last chance. But deep down, she must have known the truth. Rome was too strong, and Octavian would not stop until she was gone. Still, Cleopatra refused to give up her dignity. She was not the type of queen to kneel quietly before her enemy. Whatever happened next, she was determined to write the ending of her own story. Now it's time to do some practice. Vocabulary. Rumor. A story people tell that may not be true. Example. Octavian spread rumors about Cleopatra. Repeat. Rumor. Fleet. A group of ships. Example. Cleopatra and Antony had a fleet of warships. Repeat. Fleet. Balance. When two sides are equal or almost equal. Example. The future of Rome and Egypt hung in the balance. Repeat. Balance. Chaos. Complete confusion and disorder. Example. There was chaos when Cleopatra's ships left. Repeat. Chaos. Defeat. To lose in a battle or competition. Example. Antony's soldiers faced defeat. Repeat. Defeat. Dignity. The quality of being proud and respected. Example. Cleopatra wanted to keep her dignity. Repeat. Dignity. Practice section. Repeat after me. Octavian spread rumors about Antony and Cleopatra. Cleopatra and Antony had a fleet of warships. The future of Rome and Egypt hung in the balance. There was chaos when Cleopatra's ships left. Antony's soldiers faced defeat. Cleopatra wanted to keep her dignity. Part 9. Cleopatra's final days. After the crushing defeat at Actium, Cleopatra and Antony returned to Alexandria. But the city no longer felt safe. Octavian's power was growing, and soon his armies marched into Egypt. Cleopatra must have felt the walls closing in. Her kingdom, her love, her dream of independence, all slipping away. Antony tried to fight, but his strength and spirit were broken. Stories say that when Antony thought Cleopatra had been captured, he was devastated. Believing he had lost everything, he fell on his own sword. When he learned Cleopatra was still alive, he was carried to her, bleeding and dying. They say he took his last breath in her arms. Imagine the grief Cleopatra felt in that moment. She had lost not just her ally, but the man she loved. Now Cleopatra was left alone. Octavian was in Alexandria, and she knew he would not show mercy. He planned to take her to Rome as a prisoner. Cleopatra understood what that meant. She would be paraded through the streets, mocked by crowds, displayed as a trophy of Rome's victory. For a proud queen, that was worse than death. So, Cleopatra made her choice. She would decide her own ending. She dressed in her royal robes, surrounded herself with treasures, and prepared for her final act. The most famous story says that she arranged for a basket of figs to be brought into her chambers. Hidden inside was an asp, a small but deadly Egyptian snake. Cleopatra let the snake bite her, ending her life quickly. Other accounts suggest poison or other methods, but the snake story has lived on through history, perhaps because it feels so symbolic. The Queen of Egypt choosing an Egyptian symbol to take her life. Whatever the truth, Cleopatra died on her own terms. When Octavian entered and found her lifeless, he was furious. He had wanted to parade her in Rome, to show the world that he had defeated her. But Cleopatra had outwitted him one last time. Even in death, she kept control of her story. Her children's future was uncertain. Some were taken to Rome, others disappeared from history. Egypt itself lost its independence and became a Roman province. For over 300 years, the Ptolemaic dynasty had ruled Egypt. With Cleopatra's death, that dynasty ended, and yet Cleopatra's story didn't fade. Far from it. She became larger than life, a legend of intelligence, charm, and strength. Writers, artists, and leaders across centuries remembered her not as a victim, but as a queen who dared to stand against the might of Rome. Now, let's do some learning. Vocabulary: devastated, extremely sad or destroyed emotionally. Example: Antony was devastated when he thought Cleopatra was captured. Repeat: devastated. Mercy: kindness or forgiveness instead of punishment. Example: Cleopatra knew Octavian would not show mercy. Repeat: mercy. Parade: to march or display something in public. Example: Octavian wanted to parade Cleopatra in Rome. Repeat: parade. Trophy: a prize or symbol of victory. Example: Cleopatra refused to be Octavian's trophy. Repeat: trophy. Symbolic: something that stands for a bigger idea. Example: the snake was symbolic in Cleopatra's death. Repeat: symbolic. Destiny: what is meant to happen in someone's life. Example: Cleopatra chose her own destiny. Repeat: destiny. Practice section. Repeat after me. Antony was devastated when he thought Cleopatra was captured. Cleopatra knew Octavian would not show mercy. Octavian wanted to parade Cleopatra in Rome. Cleopatra refused to be Octavian's trophy. The snake was symbolic in Cleopatra's death. Cleopatra chose her own destiny. And that brings us to the end of this story. Cleopatra's life was full of brilliance, danger, and courage. She was born into a world of power and chaos, yet she stood out with her intelligence, her charm, and her ability to lead. She faced rivals in her own family, wars with Rome, and endless rumors meant to destroy her name. And still, she refused to be silent, even when the greatest empire of the time pushed against her. Cleopatra fought for Egypt's independence, for her children's future, and for her own dignity. She loved, she ruled, she inspired, and when the end came, she chose her own destiny instead of letting others write it for her. The Ptolemaic dynasty ended with her, but her story never did. For more than 2,000 years, Cleopatra has remained alive in memory, a queen, a strategist, a woman who dared to stand against Rome itself. She was not just the last pharaoh of Egypt. She was proof that even in the face of overwhelming power, one person's courage can echo through history forever. If you learned something from Cleopatra's story, you can go ahead and share in the comments section. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.